Let's go for the first slide. Genesis 8, Lord willing, we'll do a whole chapter. I know you think we can't do it. We probably won't do it. But hey, as they say, if you don't tell God your goals and He don't laugh at you, they're not high enough. There you go. That's my high goal. We're going to get through a whole chapter of Genesis. So this is the last Wednesday of July. And so 7 months into it, we are ahead of schedule. We're in chapter 8. That's not too bad. Not too bad, right? Considering it took us probably 3 months to get through first 2-3 chapters. So we did a chapter and a half last week, a chapter this week. Before you know it, we'll be done with the book of Genesis by the time by the time pandemic's over with, which it will never end. So we've got the flood, right, all the way through chapter 7. It's raining, it's pouring. Noah is in the ark snoring. And so now we're getting, the waters are receding. And we see it right away. It would help if I were there. I was in Sunday morning sermon passage there. Chapter 8, verse 1 says, But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. Right away, we should make a note of something, and that is the phrase, God remembered. Now, hopefully, by now, at this point, you know that often the Bible uses anthropomorphic language. That is, it attributes human attributes and descriptions to God, not saying that God has a mind that forgets, or that God has a hand, or whatever, or God has vocal cords, right? When it says God spoke, it's not. It's to help the reader understand what is happening here. So when it says God remembers, it doesn't mean simultaneously God had forgotten, right? It'd been raining for 40 days. They're hanging out 150 more days, right? It's not like, oh man, I woke up this morning and I looked down and I just remembered. Noah and the crew went swimming, right? That's not how it works. Like the way we do with we leave clothes in the washer too long, or we leave the oven on, or something like that, right? Or some people don't change the thermostat when they leave the house, right? That was the joke from a few weeks ago. But rather, it is a way to describe God fulfilling His covenantal promises. Right? We get this throughout the Bible. I'll give you a few examples. Most of these are from Genesis. So Genesis 8:1, God remembered. I think this is the first time we see this phrase. God remembered the promise He had made Noah, right? In chapter 19, so it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, the Sodom and Gomorrah, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when He overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So in the promises that God had made to Abraham, both the specific one and more general, God remembers. He's going to keep His covenantal promise. Chapter 30, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. Right? So this isn't a covenantal issue. It's just a grace issue. And then, of course, there's Exodus 2, and God heard their groaning, right, the slaves in Egypt. God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Again, it's not that God forgot, that Israel had been in slavery for 300 years, and He thought, there's something I'm supposed to do for these people. What was it? And He's digging through his desk in his home office for that Post-it note he can't find. Come to find out, it was under the couch cushions the whole time. That's not what it means. It's a way of describing God fulfilling His covenantal promise for His people. Now notice that in these examples, these three, of course 4 if you add Genesis 8, these involve judgment and creations. The judgment of Sodom, Genesis 19. The creation of life in the barren womb of Rachel. The creation of a new nation out of slavery, Exodus 2. And the judgment of God in light of the flood. So God remembered is a covenantal issue. And in covenant language, you typically get judgment and creation and redemption. So God remembered, which means God's going to pull back on the flooding. And what do we see there in verse 1 is the wind. That word should stick out to us. That word is found throughout Genesis. The first usage in Genesis is in verse 2. This is going to be very important. You got to see this in order to appreciate the flood narrative, at least what's going on in chapter 8. Here it is. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, where's the word wind there? Y'all remember? What is it? Spirit. The Spirit of God. is hovering over. That's what you said, Andrew? Oh, there you go. Right? Remember, in both Greek and Hebrew, wind, spirit, and breath are the same word. Right? So I always use this example because it's helpful to me. John 3, when Jesus says, you do not know where the wind blows or where it comes from, neither do you know the Spirit of God, right? Where it comes from, right? It's the same word. So in the Hebrew Bible, it plays on this all the time. Just a play on words. We'll see a few more examples in chapter 8 with Noah, for example, which means rest. So what you have here is we need to remember that this chapter in particular, but really the whole Noahic story, is a story of recreation. So Noah means rest. Obviously, that is picking up on creation language. Remember, Noah took 7 days to get all the animals on the ark. And so after the 7th day, we start decreation. Everything's going to be destroyed. And then what we're getting now in chapter 8 is recreation. So creation language is all over the place. And right away, at the beginning of chapter 8, as the waters recede, we go all the way back to the beginning of creation. Now, we talked about verse 2, and it's a funny verse, chapter 1, verse 2. But we see the Spirit of God, the Ruach of God, the wind of God, because it's not wind, it's spirit, the same word, hovering over creation. What you have then is God sees chaos, and he brings out of that chaos order. What is it that God is doing here? The wind comes over the chaos, and what do you get out of it is order. Right? The waters will recede, the animals will be set free, mankind will begin to multiply and be fruitful, so on and so forth. So we get a new creation story out of this. Let me just note here, you tell me whether or not this was right or wrong. I could be talked to any other way. But when I read this in verse 2, that God made a wind blow over the earth and the water subsided, what does that sound like in the Bible? If I were to read that half a verse to you, where in the Bible would you think I just read it from? Exodus 14, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. Now, there's some creation language there, isn't it? You see the division between the dry and wet. So there's some hints of that. This is immediately what jumped to my mind when I read this today. I came across it in one other commentator that mentioned it. I think we have to be careful not to read too much into it, but there is some overlap, I think. That God calls a wind, and out of that wind comes dry land. Well, through this wind, you get dry land, eventually, right? But I want to throw this out here right at the top. What are the parallels between creation story, Genesis 1, and the flood abating story, Genesis 8? I think you'll find this fascinating. If not, I find it fascinating. You have to suffer through it. Notice the light. Of course, day 1 is light. Look at verse 2 of Genesis 8. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were closed. The rain from the heavens were restrained. Now, what comes out of that? If the windows are closed, what does that describe? Right. So the clouds. What happens when it's a really cloudy day? It gets dark. So when the wind blows and the water starts to recede, what happens? Those windows are then opened. What do you get? Light. Now, it's not clearly stated there. I looked really hard. It's just not clearly stated there. But I do think it's assumed. And given the pattern we see with all the other days, I think we can see it right there. We start with darkness, and out of darkness, God will bring light. And that's what he did on day 1. He called the day light, or the light day, and the darkness night. That's essentially what you have here, except now you're coming from night, darkness, into the light. And then you get, in verse 3, water. Remember that the second day you get the separation of the water. You got the sky and clouds, all that up top. You got the sea on the bottom. So verse 3, the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. Now, what you don't have yet, you'll notice there, is land popping up. What you have is water has filled the earth. So we're back to Genesis 1:2. But now it's starting to recede, and as the waters recede, now it doesn't mean that the whole globe is literally full of water. I'm talking literally, we need to see this, that as the waters recede, you get more of the air, less of the water. So you're getting this separation, the firmament, right, if you King Jamers, may recall, you're getting more of that in verse 3. The land, remember, the dry land has to come out. That's day 4. So day 3, verse 4 says, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, there's a lot of sevens there, I wonder why, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Now, think about how it works. In creation, you get the land comes out of the ground. It's water. Don't panic, Irma. It's not sweet tea. So you get water that comes out of the ground. Now what are you essentially having? If you're on the ark, all you see everywhere you go is water. Then all of a sudden, what do you feel under you? Ground. Now, it's not literally coming out of the ground. It's already there. But it's going to feel like it because you're just up there floating. Right? And so you get a fulfillment of day 3. Day 4, you get the sun, verse 5 and 6. The waters continued to abate until the 10th month. And the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountain were seen. At the end of the 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made. Now, how do you see the mountains? Well, you got to have light to see them. And you remember in verse 2, the emphasis was the closing of the window, darkness. Now what you're getting is you can see by day. And the way we see by day is through the sun, not to insult your intelligence. Day 5, birds and fish, all that. Verse 7 and 11, this is where you get the raven and the dove. I trust you're familiar with it. So you're going to get the birds being sent out into creation. Day 6 is verses 14 and 19 when they leave the ark, which you'll find is the same creation language. Birds, animals, and humans all leave the ark, and they go out to be fruitful and multiply. And what we'll see whenever we get there, it won't say the phrase according to its kind, but it'll speak of family units. So it's very similar language. So according to its kind shows up multiple times in Genesis 1. Similar language is used here in Genesis 8. The point is to see that this chapter is a retelling of the creation narrative. But obviously creation was the beginning of all things. And God wipes out, hits reset on the computer, Control-Alt-Delete. And now this is a new creation. So when Noah gets off, he is to march into essentially a Garden of Eden. But what he finds is no Garden of Eden, right? He's going to ruin the garden. We'll see next week in chapter 9. He takes the fruit of a tree, a vine. He takes it, sins with it, and curses his son because of it. It's the same story. So we're going to move from Genesis 1 and 2 to Genesis 3 between chapter 8 and chapter 9. I find that very, very helpful. Oh, and rest. Verse 4, I didn't put it up here. Day 7 is rest. Verse 4, the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest. I don't think it's the same word as Genesis 2:1, but I think it's a play on words for Noah, which shouldn't be surprising. So you get all 7 days of creation. With that, verse 2, it says, the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were closed. The rain from the heavens were restrained. That word deep, again, more creation language. Not only is the theme of creation there, but the language is creation. The word deep, I want to show you the first 3 references of this word deep. Verse 2, the earth was without form and void, and the darkness over the face of the deep. Whatever that means, right? And then, second one, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 7th month, 17th day, that was again the emphasis of 7, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. And then the third reference is there in 8:2, the fountains of the deep, right, and the windows were closed. So clearly, I think it is creation language. So you see in both the cause of the flood, the deep, and you see the receding of the flood there of the deep. Not only that, that word restrained there in verse 2, the rain from the heavens was restrained. This is the first time it is used in the Bible. Contrast this with the other parallels in mythical lore. We touched on this briefly last week. There are countless other flood narratives in ancient cultures. The most famous is the Epic of Gilgamesh. If you waste your time on the History Channel, you've probably seen this. I'm sure he was an alien, no doubt. But they believe that the more historical flood narrative is Gilgamesh. I think that's garbage. Let me show you one big difference. Notice that God is restraining it. God is Lord over it, and which doesn't surprise us because he is sovereign over creation. Just as he created, he's creating again. So in Epic of Gilgamesh, this is what it reads. The gods were frightened by the deluge, and shrinking back, they ascended to the heaven of Anu. The gods cowered like dogs, crouched against the outer wall. The gods, all humbled, sit and weep. The big difference, isn't it? Now, you need to know that in most polytheistic culture, the gods are like you and me. They've got the same passions as you and me. So if you ever study like Greek mythology or Roman mythology, you'll find that they would mix with human women because they couldn't take their eyes off of them, right? So you get demigods, Hercules and others, half God, half man. Now, Jesus is fully God, fully man. It's a huge, huge, huge difference, right? Achilles, half God, half man, right? All of those. And so what you get are the gods have passions like we do. Well, they almost are scared to death, it looks like, of nature. So it's almost as if nature is Lord even over the early Babylonian gods. Well, in the Bible, it's the opposites. God is the cause of the flood. And God is the one who is sovereign over the flood. Right? And so he says, you will go this high and no higher. Now it's time for you to go back down. Right? That is God's sovereign care over all of that. In verse 3, we see that they spent 150 more days on the ark. They will spend a little over a year on the ark. Now, if you're into this, some say it's a full solar year. And so the reason they point that out is they enter the ark January 1st, I guess is how this works. And then a full solar year later, they get off the ark, and what do you find? The calendar has changed, but so has the earth. They're walking on a brand new earth, essentially. Now, it's not brand new in the sense it was in the Garden of Eden, but since everything is different from before. Right? And I don't know if the timing, the numbers work out just perfectly, but it does look like it's at least a year, if not just a few days over a year. You can do your own research. I didn't think it was really worth the time. And there is verse 4 again, rested, that the ark rested. Decreation is done. It's the play on words with Noah. All right, let's talk about Ararat there in verse 4. In the 7th month, 17th day, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Now, with a description like that, why can't we just go to the mountain called Ararat and find a giant boat and say, see, we were right all along, right? I started to hear the church, but went in for lunch and finished it. When I say I recommend them, what I'm not saying is everything they're doing is correct and right, and you should believe everything on them. But they're fun, and they're entertaining, and I think they're quite insightful. When I took an ancient Near East culture class at Boyce, we watched a little documentary about an hour long called The Search for the Real Mount Sinai. I love it. I don't know if they actually find the real Mount Sinai, but if you're cheap like me, you should be able to find it for free on the YouTube. Right? I think I've got a copy of it somewhere. And basically what it is two guys who got enough money to do this. Their names are literally, I'm not making it up, Bob and Larry. And if you Lord of the Rings fans, the guy that plays Gimli, John Rhys Davies, he's a big Christian. He was in the One Night with the King movie. He played Mordecai. He's been in other stuff. He is the host. He's the voice, right, the narrator. And to hear him say with that voice, Bob and Larry got in a truck and went up, it's just hilarious. The Search for the Real Mount Sinai is by far the best one. They've done one on Noah's Ark, and they think they found something. They're not saying it is Noah's Ark. They're saying that it's something. It's a piece of wood in Iran. They tell you how they found it and all that sort of stuff. So I don't think we have found the Ark. Whenever I was a professor several years ago, I taught a hermeneutics class and teaching them how to read the Bible, interpret the Bible, stuff like that. And they would have to write a paper at the end of the class, and they all wanted to do Noah. And I would beg them, say, guys, if you want to do Noah, fine, but there's like 40 of you guys here. I don't want to just read about Noah. Someone tell me about, Deborah and Barak or something. Just randomly pick a name in the Bible and just go. I don't know. Well, a bunch would do Noah. And I said, look, if you put on there, we have found the ark because you Googled it, you fail the whole paper. Okay? I mean, there's plenty of people who think they have found the ark, right? And they've got their reasons and all that. But it is fascinating how precise the Bible is. Like the Epic of Gilgamesh will tell you on this mountain, which actually isn't far from Ararat, Gilgamesh land and all that sort of stuff. But the Bible's very precise. Now notice it doesn't say the mountain Ararat. And so what we get, when we read it that way, is we think it lands on the peak of this mountain called Ararat. And when I was growing up, I thought that, is it Arafat? Was that the Palestinian leader? That just threw me off so much because he was a bad guy, right? And Ararat's supposed to be a good thing, right? It's where Noah landed. And I just couldn't wrap my mind around those names. Anyways, it actually says the mountains of Ararat, which describes the mountain range. So when you think of those images, there he is just balancing on top of the mountain peak. That's probably not accurate. It's somewhere in the mountain range. But even with that, there is a mountain called Ararat, and that is the traditional site. But don't assume that that is exactly it, because names change over millennia. So the Bob and Larry video, they actually go to Iran as to Armenia, not to be confused with Armenian for you Calvinists here. But what is interesting is how Ararat is actually used in the Bible. It's used not just for a mountain, but to describe an entire nation. Let me give you a few examples of this. 2 Kings 19, and as he was worshiping in the house of, you pronounce it your way, his god, Adramelech. And Melech there means king, so someone is a king. And his son struck him down with the sword and escaped into the land of Ararat. Not the mountain, it's a land. But the land is the most notable geographical thing about it is the mountain. So the whole land is called that. So like the bluegrass state, well, the bluegrass is centered in the central area. That's why this is the bluegrass area. As far as I know, that doesn't quite, it's not like it's only from the north of Tennessee, south of Ohio, where you find bluegrass. But the central part of the state is mostly known for bluegrass. But when you say bluegrass, you're really talking about the whole state, right? I hope I'm getting my... Yeah, that's right. Isaiah 37, he was worshiping in the house of... Now, I want you to notice real quick. Notice these are almost exactly the same. Look at the two middle lines. These are two very different verses. I just want to put a plug in here, a little footnote. You will never care about this, but when I was in seminary, I just was fascinated by this. It's called source criticism. What it means is, where did the biblical writers get their information? One of the fascinating things about the Bible is, at times, they get it from other biblical writers. That is awesome to me. So, you read Jude and 2 Peter 2, someone's borrowing from someone. Read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, someone's borrowing from someone and someone else. It's like 90% of Mark is found in Matthew and Luke, if not more. Right, so who was first? Matthew or Mark or Luke? That's why most scholars think Mark came first, and Matthew and Luke borrowed Mark as a common source. At times it's verbatim the same. The prophets do this too. So here's just a fun example of this. But it's in the land of Ararat, same thing as it was there. One more, Jeremiah 51. Set up a standard on the earth, blow the trumpet among the nations, prepare the nations for war against her, summon against her the kingdoms Ararat. Notice, Ararat is an entire kingdom. So my point here is to say that when the Bible speaks of Ararat, it isn't just a mountain peak, but it really is a region. So, good luck finding the boat. Not to mention it was like 5,000 years ago or something. That sounds like a long time. I don't know. Finding wood that is that old, I would think, would be difficult. Verse 6, they're on the boat for 40 days, 40 more days. So it took 40 days for the water to rise. It will take 40 days for them to abate, all that. But in verse 7 and following, we get the raven and the dove. Now, the language of verse 7 says, and he sent forth a raven, it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. I always had imagined that he sent a raven, waited until it came back or whatever. But the language suggests he was constantly doing this. Now, why a raven? You ever thought about that? Ravens are scavenger birds. That's why you're not supposed to shoot them, right? Although there is a season for ravens, right? You have to get a license for that? That's what I'm thinking of, yeah. When I would do turkey hunting, we talked about that. We want to get rid of some of them. All right, but ravens, they're scavenger animals. Now, why is that so important? Well, there's a whole lot of death going on. And if what you're going to find first is death before life. Because all those people, all those animals, all of that is gone. And ravens, they don't need anything much to be satisfied. All they need is a carcass. And so I think that is what Noah is going for here. But notice that ravens are looking for death. And so that lets Noah know that, the land is coming out of the water. And it's the devastation of God's judgment. So remember that Noah's Ark is as much about God's judgment as it is about his mercy. Both are important. And the raven goes out and finds God's judgment, carcasses to eat. But then in verse 8 and 12, we get the dove. So then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark. The waters were still in the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, a cycle of creation, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening. Behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Now quickly notice, doves are the opposites of ravens. One is black, one is white, one is unclean, the other is clean. One finds death, the other finds life. So the raven goes out and he's looking for the signs of God's judgment. The dove is sent out after another cycle or two of creation, and he is sent out to find life. Decreation, recreation. And that's what he does. It's no accident that it's the branch from an olive tree, because they're very difficult to kill and to destroy. From what I've read, they can still sprout leaves and stuff even when submerged underwater. I'm not an expert on any of that stuff, so I assume it's that stuff is true. But that is interesting, isn't it? Now that olive tree branch becomes a picture for peace and whatnot in the Bible. Hosea 14:6 is a good example of that. The international symbol of peace is a dove with an olive branch in it, right? In fact, we'll say, hey, you think we can have an olive branch, right? We've not been getting along, let's put an olive branch on it. It's a sign of peace. It comes right here from the Bible, all right? Wait until the leftists find out about that. They'll have to come up with something more politically correct. But one last thing to note in terms of these first 12 verses. Do I have them up here? All right. What you get in these first 12 verses is a story about patience. It's about creation, about all of that. But Noah's a real person hanging out on a boat. I think this is important because I am losing patience and have been for about 5 months now. Anyone else? Yeah. We all are going crazy. And I've been blessed that I can still come to the office. But not everyone's been able to do that. And I'm going stir crazy. But notice how long. So he spent 7 days gathering the animals again, creation. Heavy rain, 40 days, another 150 for landing on Ararat, waters recede. Noah sends out raven and dove. Took over 50 days to do that. Right? That's a long wait. Are you willing to be on a boat that stinks from animal waste with your in-laws for a year? The answer is no. I don't care who you are. No. I mean, Jesus wouldn't take that. Okay? Right? I think if Noah knew, he probably thought, like we did the pandemic, a couple weeks. I still remember being on Zoom calls with other pastors and leaders and stuff. We're talking about Easter. Remember, Easter was what are we going to do about Easter? I remember saying, look, the governor wants to open church on April 26th, in my mind, certainly right, it's a Monday. And I said, why don't we just push Easter back a week or two, whatever it was, and we'll just have Easter the day before school's open, because if they open up schools, they will open up everything else. And all of us thought, that's brilliant. That is laughable now, because the governor still doesn't want us to celebrate Easter. So if we can just keep Jesus in that tomb for a little longer, it'd be all right. But it's incredible how long he is on that, trusting in the patient, sovereign care of God. Well, in verses 13 to 22, we get Noah leaving the ark. Now, think of this. If you were in Noah's shoes, what is the first thing you would do when you leave the ark?
Put on boots, because it's probably muddy.
You're the Dwight Schrute of East Frankfort Baptist Church. Okay, after you put on boots, what are you going to do, right?
Kiss the ground.
Kiss the ground. Yeah, that's yes. We're home, honey. We're home.
Home sweet home.
They don't know where home is. They don't know where they landed, but hey, they landed. That's all you care about. Reminds me when Man and I took our first international trip. I guess our only international trip together. The first thing we did when we landed in the U.S., I think Man remembers, we said the first fast food joint we get, we're going to get their signature burger. It was Burger King. We both got a Whopper. And it was delicious. Right? We love the food down in Trinidad and Tobago, but we just, good old Americans, get us a burger. Burger and fries, and then a Coke, and we'll be happy. I'll mention this Sunday morning, but we got stir crazy early on, about 2 months into all this. So we took a family trip to Minerva, Kentucky, Mason County, and we went to go see a gravesite. We knew we couldn't stop, so we told the kids, use the bathroom now. There's literally nowhere to go, right? Maybe we'll find a gas station, you can go there. And it was a good little family trip. Got a hold of the guy that actually owned the property, really nice gentleman, and he was on private land. But that's what we did. We went to go see dead people. I don't know what you would do, but actually that is what Noah had to have done. Gets off, and what does he find? Just the remnants of destruction, no doubt, both human and animal. Well, after about a year of being on the ark, he exits there in verse 13 and verse 14. So we see emphasis on the dry again. Verse 13, in 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, and the waters were dried from off the earth. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. You can do whatever you want with those dates. I can't keep up with them. Some do better with that than I do, so I don't have anything for you. But notice again the connection to creation. Genesis 1, 9 and 10. God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place. Let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called sea. And God saw that it was good. What is Noah doing? He is leaving the sea for the dry land. It's a creation story. I love this. You guys may not like it. I love it. It's just the more I read the Bible, the more I appreciate just how well it is written. And I'm not sure there is another book quite like it. I'm reading through Beowulf again, and I love all the little snippets I'm catching, and how the king is described and how Grendel is described. It is nothing like the Bible when you really enjoy it. You could read it at the surface level. You can get Jesus. You can read it at a deeper level, and you can see Jesus is on every line and every page. Really is just incredible to me. And notice, God gives two commandments in verse 15. This will be a bigger deal in chapter 9. God said to Noah, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So two commandments. One, leave the ark. You can't stay here. You ain't got to go home, but you got to get up out of here. Verse 2, be fruitful and multiply. Noah is clearly the new Adam. Clearly the new Adam. And we've highlighted this throughout, haven't we? He is ordered to be fruitful and multiply. And as we've already said, he is going to usher in an age of fallenness through the fruit of the vine. He is a new Noah, or a new Adam. And notice verse 19, just verse 18, just so that we make sure we read it. So Noah went out, his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. I mentioned this earlier. Genesis 1 says God created, creeping things according to their kinds, domesticated animals according to their kinds, birds according to their kinds, right? That, to me, that's DNA language, species language. A bird is a bird and will never be a dog. I know that that will get me fired from a tenure position at Harvard, but a bird is a bird and will never be a dog, right? When two birds meet, what do they produce? birds. I don't know why this is so complicated, but I think that men are men, women are women, but, I'm a bigot like that. So I'll get over that real quick. But I do find that language fascinating. I think it's referencing back to creation. Because they're going to fill the earth by multiplying. Actually, I think this started on the ark. I do think those 2 giraffes that are so famous in all pictures, by the time they got off the ark, could have been 6 giraffes. I don't know. That was something that went through my mind going through the ark last week, is I hope they had plenty of extra space, especially for the rabbits. Right? Now, the panda bears you didn't have to worry about. But other animals, you probably did. We've had a few cats like that, right? And so that process of being fruitful and multiply, now the command is not to just be fruitful and multiply, but to fill the earth. They leave the ark, their job is to fill the earth. Now, why is that so important? Because 3 chapters later, what's the problem with humanity? They are being fruitful and multiplying. They ain't filling the earth. They're stuck in a place called Babel, which will eventually be turned into Babylon. And Babel, of course, is a play on words. They literally babbled, right? You ever hear someone you've never heard that language before? It sounds like they're babbling. Now, that sounds like it has an interesting etymology. I don't know. And then, what does Noah do? Well, the first thing Noah does, he gets off the ark, lets everyone go. He lets his animals go. He told Pharaoh. Verse 20 to 22, the first thing he does is worship. He says, Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelt the pleasing aroma. The Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So we get Noah in worship, God in covenantal promise. Now that promise will be demonstrated in chapter 9, obviously with the rainbow, but we'll see that next week. A couple things to note. First of all, this is the first reference explicitly to an altar in the Bible. Assumingly, there were altars with the story of Cain and Abel and other generations. But in terms of explicitly mentioned, this is the first one, which remember, in the creation story of Adam and Eve, what happens? There is a sacrifice in Genesis 3 for the covering of man's sin. Noah, who is the new Adam, gets off the ark, and what do we have? Yet another sacrifice being offered because of man's sin. It's the same story. In fact, we see this is the first reference to burnt offerings in the Bible. The Hebrew literally it's the same verb and noun and puts them together. So it means literally sending up that which goes up. Burnt offerings. And when you think about it, that's what a burnt offering is. And this is the first reference in the Bible. Such a sacrifice is totally consumed on the altar, and its ascending smoke provides a soothing aroma for God, which you have here, a pleasing aroma. The word there is a play on words. It is similar to the word Noah. So, what is it that Noah does when he gets off the ark? You have a new creation. What does he do? He finds rest. How does he find rest? In pleasing the Lord. God is pleased with the sacrifice. Creation is completed. So as God was pleased at the end of creation, he took rest, so God is pleased with this new creation. By the way, Leviticus 1 uses the same language, similar language, I should say. The priest shall burn all of it on the altar as burnt offerings, as a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So remember that much that you find in the Mosaic law is introduced in the narrative. Burnt offerings being one, tithe being another, 7-day rest, all of that is introduced early on. And 21:22 is the promise of God. The promise that God will not curse the ground. Remember that Genesis 3 language. Curses the ground, right, to Adam. God will make the same promise. He will remember that promise in Isaiah. This is like the days of Noah to me, as I swore that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth. So I have sworn that I will not be angry with you and I will not rebuke you. He remembers this promise he makes. And verse 22 I find really fascinating. It's a merism. A merism is when you take two polar opposites and you combine them together. So notice that you have here, what he's saying is, so long as there is seed time and harvest, that is agriculture, so long as there's agriculture, so long as there's a Kentucky, right? So long as there's cold and heat, that is what we call in the business weather. I guess today we would call that climate change. Day and night, we call that time. God says where there is agriculture, weather, and time, he will never curse the ground because of man. God recognizes here in this text, man will always be evil and corrupt. The answer is not moving forward to start over, but to redeem. So we start that process in chapter 12. God does another act of judgment in chapter 11 of the Tower of Babel in that he disperses mankind to fill the earth. But in chapter 12, out of that dispersion comes a man from a town near Babel called Ur. His name's Abram. And it's through Abram, God will redeem a people. First Israel, and out of Israel comes the Messiah. And that is now the gospel goes to the ends of the earth. God will fill the earth with the gospel. And that's the hope of Jesus. So we'll get this when we get to Tower of Babel. Acts 2 is the fulfillment of Tower of Babel and Abraham. To where before God dispersed people by language, now because of Jesus and his ascension, God brings all the language together to hear the gospel. So that now they'll be dispersed to the ends of the earth. So it's beautiful, isn't it? I don't know. I hope you guys just find this stuff fascinating. I love it. It just gets me excited. One last thing. I think I've got the verse up here. Yes. What do we do with the ark? What does that have to do with Jesus? It has everything to do with Jesus. Jesus has this interesting language in Luke 12. He says, I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. I got to be honest with you. I came across that from the Bible Project, in case you care. And I thought, I've never read that verse in my life. Now, if you've been following daily devotions, we will finish Luke Monday. And I've read every bit of Luke in doing those devotions. I've read this verse. We were in chapter 12. I do not remember anything about chapter 12. I don't remember this verse going through chapter 12. You ever do that with the Bible? You read it a million times. And just like, when did God add that over the last week, right? What is the baptism he is talking about here? It's the cross. He's already been baptized in the story. It's like 1 or 2 verses in Luke. Matthew gives all the detail. So he's already been baptized by John the baptizer. John the Southern baptizer, let me add that. But here he's speaking of a different baptism. This is noetic language, isn't it? There's a baptism by which I must be baptized. In the biblical language, the Red Sea crossing is a type of baptism. We've talked about it with the temptation of Jesus. Go back to the devotions of Matthew and I articulate that in more detail. But the Red Sea, it was first came by the means of the ark. Remember that when Moses was put in the basket, the word there is ark. It's the same word for Noah, giant building. One is a giant boat, the other is a little basket. And so there's clearly a connection between Noah and Moses. So this is a type of baptism. But there's a huge difference between what God did in Noah's day and what God has done in Christ's day. The big difference is that in Noah's day, God judged everyone but preserved one man. On the cross, God saves all of humanity because of judgment upon one man. He flips it. And he does it by the means of his son. And it's not an accident that a specific type of wood had to be used for the ark. And he was nailed to a tree at the cross. Isn't that beautiful? This is the Bible. I hope it gets you excited. That's everything I have. Frank, you got any questions that I can dodge?
I think that Noah doesn't get enough credit for his patience. I mean, the man preached 120 years and nobody responded. It must have been awfully disappointing when he got on the ark with his 8 people.
Yeah. There is, I had to learn early on, God requires of us faithfulness, not results. If you leave with God the results, you'll be fine. A lot of pastors think, I've got to save this church from dying. and you can't. Right? Either God will save the church or you won't. Well, your job is to be faithful. If that means preaching for 120 years and no one hearing, no one receiving Christ, that is not your responsibility. Be faithful and do it to the best of your ability and the gifts God has given you. I believe it was William Carey, or was it Adoniram Judson? Susan Hutchinson probably tells you. She's our missionary expert. He preached foreign soil as some of the first missionaries for years before having the first converts. Years. William Carey's first convert, I know it took him a few years. That first convert became a primary source of his ultimate mission there. He really changed Burma. But it took him years to get that one. Adoniram Judson, in and out of prison. In fact, it was the stress of Adoniram that his wife dies. Trying to visit and minister to him in prison. So our job is not to save everyone. Our job is to be faithful, trusting that through faithfulness, the Lord will add to his kingdom. Right. It's a radical shift in our thinking. And it's why a lot of pastors in particular suffer from depression. 120 years of long ministry. I hope I don't last that long. I love you guys. I just don't know if I can handle 120 years in Frankfort, you know? 2020 has been bad enough. Any other snide remarks you want to make? That's what my parents always called them when we had our family discussion. Okay, maybe y'all didn't have a happy childhood. Okay, how about, since we can't hold hands and Andy might be watching, how about we stand up and pray? You guys are getting out 5 minutes early. We went through a whole chapter and you got out early. God is still doing miracles in this day. All right. So Lord willing, what we're doing Sunday morning, we're going to go back to having 2 Sunday school classes Sunday morning. So Don and Danny are going to be teaching. When they get to a stopping point, we're going to add another class or 2 and hoping to have a good rotation of teachers. They've been really faithful the last several weeks in helping us to adjust to all this. Also, Sunday evening, our young adults, we're reading through a book of philosophy about atheism, Christianity, and all that sort of stuff. If you want to get down on that, you can. It's a really short book. It's a little over 60 pages. No pictures in it, so Andrew back there is really struggling with it. But if that's something you want to go, so it would be a deeper discussion about philosophy and how to think about things. And so that's something you're interested in. You can join us. We'll have to order you some books quickly, but you can join us with that. Or if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can get it for free. Well, you're paying for it, it's just not like that. But so that will be Sunday night at 4:45. So we're going to do 2 different services, Sunday morning, Sunday night. But Sunday night will be mass required. So we're keeping that. But we're just going to go back to our regular schedule, just require mass on Sunday evening. But they're recommended in the morning. I have to say that, Andy. I did say it. So, all right, with that, how about we close out in prayer? And I'm tired of talking. Carrie, will you close us out in prayer?
Heavenly Father, we are grateful for you.